Hello and welcome to this presentation on the transition to ISO 22000 2018 and FSSC 22000 version 5. My name is Michael Govro and I'm the Technical Scheme Manager for FSSC 22000 and ISO 22000 at NSF International. Our objective today is to point out the major differences between ISO 22000-2005 and its replacement, ISO 22000-2018. We hope to help you understand the changes you'll be required to make in your food safety management system. And please note that in all things FSSC, the word food equates to all types of activities that are covered under the standard. So that includes food, packaging, materials, feed, and biochemicals, to name a few. Due to time restrictions and the length of the standard, this webinar is not intended to be a comprehensive training. We do have training opportunities available through the NSF training group, and we will discuss those at the end of this presentation. Just a little bit of information on the color coding. The text in gray font is information. The black font is to draw your attention to actual changes in the standard. And the rusty red font are things to consider when revising your food safety management system. So they're questions you can ask yourself, questions that the auditors might ask when they're auditing, things that they might look at or ask when they interview your employees. So just look at those as little hints, and you can refer to those after this presentation. It's very important to read the standard. Read all of it. Read every word of it and make sure you're familiar with all of the changes. The three documents that are important for you to read are the ISO 22000-2018 standard itself. That's a copyrighted document, and you need to purchase that from the ISO store. We cannot provide that for you. The ISO 22000 gap analysis that was done by FSSC, I've sent that out to all of our certified facilities, so you should have that, as well as the FSSC version 5 standard. You can get that from the FSSC website for free if you don't have that. So just a little bit about the differences in the two standards. ISO 22000 is a management system standard. It's a single standard, whereas the FSSC 22000 is a GFSI benchmarked standard that is comprised of the ISO 22000 standard, a technical standard for the prerequisite program requirements, and some additional requirements in the FSSC standard itself. We refer to those cleverly as the additional requirements. And you can see the numbers for the technical standards here in the middle of the page. So what has changed? Well, the ISO standard itself has changed from the 2005 version to the 2018 version. You'll be happy to know that the technical standards, for those of you who are FSSC certified, they have not changed, no change at all. And the additional requirements have only changed slightly in that they've added some definitions, they've rearranged the order of things and some new numbers, but there are no new requirements for currently certified organizations. There is an item that was in the additional requirements, management of services. That's been deleted from the additional requirements because it's now adequately addressed in the ISO 22000 standard. As far as timelines go, the implementation date for both the new ISO standard and the new FSSC standard is January 1st, 2020. So all audits through this year, through 2019, will be to the old version, ISO 22005 and FSSC version 4.1. And all audits after January 1st will be to the new standards. And FSSC version 5 upgrade audits will be announced. So if you were expecting to have an unannounced surveillance audit in 2020, that will be an announced audit. We'll catch your your unannounced audit in the next year. So ISO 22000-2018 employs what's referred to as the high-level structure, which is defined in Annex SL. And it is found in all new ISO standards. It's sort of a way of formatting the standard so that all of them are organized in a very similar fashion. And this allows organizations to integrate their ISO 22000 management system with other ISO standards such as ISO 9001, the quality standard, ISO 14001, the environmental standard, and ISO 45001, the occupational health and safety standard, which some of you may be certified to those. I know many of our customers have ISO 9001. The high-level structure employs the Deming Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle. This is referred to as the process approach. So the 4 steps are plan, which is where you establish the objectives of your system and your processes. You plan to provide those resources necessary to deliver results and identify and address risks and opportunities. Do, as the name implies, is where you implement whatever you've planned. The check part of the cycle is where you monitor and measure your processes and resulting products and services, analyze those results, and evaluate that information and data and your verification activities and report out those results. And then the act part of the cycle is where you take that information and put it into action to improve performance as necessary. So you just keep going through that cycle, and it's a continuous improvement cycle. This slide shows you the Plan, Do, Check, Act cycle and how it was applied in the old standard versus the new, the old being on the left and the new being on the right. You can see the standard had 5 major headings in the old standard, and now there are 7. The process approach is applied in 2 separate cycles in the standard working together. One covers organizational planning and control, which is your management system, and one covering operational planning and control, which is the principles of your HACCP program. And this chart illustrates how those cycles are applied in each part of your food safety management system, the organizational part and the operational part. Risk-based thinking is another concept in the new standard, and it is essential for achieving an effective food safety management system. Risk-based thinking is also applied on 2 levels, organizational and operational, which is, of course, consistent with the process approach described in section 0.3.2.
So section 4 addresses the context of the organization, and this is the first step in the planning process. Next. So you must determine your external and internal issues relevant to your organization's purpose and your ability to achieve intended results. And you are required to review and update that information. So that's really what the context is determining your internal and external issues. There is a note in 4.1 that provides guidance on the types of things that you should consider, and it includes but is not limited to all of the things that are listed here. I'm not going to read the whole list. Next, please. And here are some questions that you should ask yourself, things to think about as you define the context of your organization. Next, please. You also need to understand the needs and expectations of your interested parties. So the first thing you need to do is identify your interested parties and think about what their needs and expectations might be. And again, this is something that needs to be reviewed and updated. Next, please. So you need to think about who your external participants are. Could be customers, it could be regulatory agencies, it could be suppliers of ingredients, subcontractors, anything that has to do with people you deal with, both internally and externally. Next. When you determine the scope of your food safety management system, this was a requirement before, but now the term services has been added, as well as activities that can have an influence on the food safety of the end product. You'll need to go back to sections 4.1 and 4.2 on the context and interested parties to inform you about how to develop the scope of your food safety management system. Next. This slide tells you what you need to think about and consider when determining the scope of your food safety management system. Products and services, processes, production sites, those things that can have an influence on food safety of your end products, and that it shall be documented. And please note that this does not stop at the walls of your facility. You also need to consider outside suppliers and vendors and so forth. Food Safety Management System 4.4 says the organization shall establish, implement, maintain, update, and continually improve your food safety management system. This is actually an existing requirement in 2005, but the word document was deleted, and the words update and continually improve were added. So make sure you incorporate those aspects in every part of your food safety management system. Next, please. Section 5 is leadership. That's another aspect of planning. Next. This was 5.1 is called leadership and commitment. It was previously titled management responsibility. They've added some requirements to include demonstrable leadership and supporting other relevant management roles. Next. Top management must facilitate understanding of the food safety policy by their employees. So this is, you can see this is a change from a focus on inputs to outputs, whereas before the policy needed to be communicated, now it needs to be understood. Next. Responsibilities, as I said, shall be understood. So our auditors will be conducting employee interviews to verify their understanding. Additional requirements have been assigned to top management related to the assignation of specific responsibilities and authorities within the food safety management system. Next. Just a few things to think about here, how you need to document your system. Next. Section 6 is planning. Next, please. Obviously fits in the planning part. This new section requires you to determine, consider, and where necessary, take action to address any risks that may impact, either positively or negatively, the impact system to deliver its intended results. So there should be evidence that you use the information determined in sections 4.1, 4.2, and 4.3 to identify risks and opportunities to be addressed. Next. You should be able to demonstrate which items you decided to address and how you will evaluate effectiveness of actions taken. And make note that this is an input, a required input to your management review, which we'll discuss later. Next. Objectives of the food safety management system and planning to achieve them has a new requirement. Food safety, statutory, regulatory, and customer requirements shall be taken into account when defining objectives. So that's new. We would suggest that you make your objectives SMART, S-M-A-R-T, which stands for specific, measurable, achievable, relevant, and time-based. Next. The objectives section will strengthen the focus on the food safety management objectives as drivers for improvement. Next, please. Planning of changes. This is a new section in 2018. You need to consider the purpose, potential consequences, integrity of the food safety management system, availability of resources, and allocation of responsibilities and authorities when making changes. Perhaps these are things you already do, but now they're specifically mentioned in the standard. Section 7 is another planning section, refers to support. The new requirements are for consideration of capability and constraints of existing resources, as well as the need for external resources in the determination of your resources needed. So think about this in your budgeting process. Next. So when you use external exports, you must have and retain evidence of agreement or contracts defining their competency, responsibility, and authority. So this is a new requirement for those of you who use external experts such as consultants. And if you do use consultants, your auditor is going to ask about this documentation. Next, please. So another new section that addresses requirements for elements of your food safety management system that are developed externally. So again, we're going to ask, how did you ensure that these elements were applicable, adapted to your processes, and remain current? Next. Control of externally provided processes, products, or services, section 7.1.6. This was addressed in the 2005 version, but in 2018 also includes the providers of products and services. Requirements have also been enhanced and made more specific. There are requirements for evaluation, selection, monitoring of performance, and reevaluation of external providers. And also requirements for adequate communication. Performance of external providers has been added as an input for management review. So make sure that you include this as a requirement input for your management review. Control of externally provided processes. This is just a little bit more information. Just make sure that your relevant documented evidence of this monitoring is retained. Examples of the externally provided processes, products, or services include raw materials, suppliers, transportation, outsourced services, warehousing, janitorial, contractors, temporary labor, and so forth, etc. Next. Competence. This is another change in focus from inputs to outputs. Food safety team competence is included under this clause, including external providers. Requirements for personnel responsible for the operation of the hazard control plan has been changed from trained to competent. So trained was an input, competent is an output. Next. Organizations must determine required competencies for anyone who impacts the food safety management system, and they're listed here. So our auditors are going to ask challenge questions when they come to do their audits, and here's a few that they might ask. Next, please. Awareness. This is a section in the previous standard, but has now been extended to include awareness related to the food safety policy, objectives relevant to the tasks, improved food safety performance, and implication of not conforming with the food safety management system requirements. So again, here are some more questions that you should consider and things that auditors will ask. Next, please. Communications, in general, additional requirements regarding the scope of the internal and external communications have been added. Understanding of effective communication requirements has been added and included under this clause. So there has to be a clear decision on whether to communicate, what to communicate, and how to communicate it. Next, please. So 7.4.2 on external communications contains some wording changes. They're using the word interested parties now, and the term suppliers, as we've mentioned before, has been changed to external provider. Next, please. Section 7.5.1 refers to documented information, the general requirements, a section that now describes information that must be documented in your food safety management system. This was not specified before. It now includes documented information required by statutory regulatory authorities and customers. Next, please. The term documented information relates to both how to operate a process, such as procedures, work instructions, etc., and evidence of the results achieved, which is the completed record. It also, you should note that a documented food safety manual is no longer required. That was wording that was in the previous standard. It's no longer there. Requirements made applicable to all types of documented information. The documented information requirements now includes records. And requirements have been added for appropriate identification, description, and format. Next, please. So organizations must control changes to documents and records. Documented information of external origin determined by the organization to be necessary for the planning and operation of the food safety management system shall be identified as appropriate and controlled. So this does not require a written procedure anymore, but it does require planning and operation to be identified and appropriate and controlled. Operation. Now we're moving on to the do phase of the cycle. Operational planning and control. This was in Section 7 before. Those were extended to take into consideration the implementation of actions defined to address risks and opportunities. And it says you shall control plan changes and review the consequences of unintended changes. So those are addressed in two different ways, plan changes and unintended changes. And if they are unintended changes, you need to review them, take action to mitigate any adverse effects as necessary, effects. So some more questions to ask yourself about how you control your operations in Section 8.1. Next, please. Prerequisite programs, the requirements in 8.2 now requires PRPs to be updated to prevent and reduce contamination risk. Section 8.2.3 says that you should consider certain things. Those are outlined in that section. And 8.2.4 then includes the minimum list of things that you shall consider when establishing your PRPs. And they have added to that list supplier approval and assurance. So this is the part that was dropped from the FSSC additional requirements. That was management of purchase materials. Now it's supplier approval and assurance in the ISO standard. Product information and consumer awareness is also new in this section. Next. Traceability, some major changes here in how the requirements are stated. Wording was changed a little bit to add including reworking in your traceability system. Also, a requirement for verification and testing of the effectiveness of the traceability system has been added. So you're going to need to do that. Read those requirements specifically and note that they require reconciliation of quantities of end products and ingredients where appropriate. So that's basically a mass balance exercise. Next, please. As I said, it requires that you take rework into account and ensure that retention time for your records is related to the shelf life of your products. Reconciliation of quantities of end products and quantities of ingredients should be considered. So are you tracking your waste? For instance, are you sending something to animal feed? Are you keeping track of your waste or your loss so that you can make sure that your inputs match your outputs? You must verify and test the effectiveness of your traceability system with a mass balance. And the standard now requires that we, as auditors, challenge your system with the trace exercise during the audit. So if you've not experienced that before, you will in the future. I believe all of our auditors have been doing that. Next, please. Emergency preparedness and response. This was a section that existed previously. Minor change, changing the word accidents to incidents, and requirement to establish and maintain documented information related to the management of incidents has been added. Next, please. Documented information must be reviewed and, where necessary, updated after the occurrence of any incident, emergency situation, or test. You must periodically test your procedures where practical. So you should design an emergency preparedness test and run a test to see if you're prepared to deal with various events that might occur, weather incidents that might cause the closure of your plant. How do you, or perhaps an event that might affect your suppliers. Do you have emergency suppliers in approved status, or do you have a procedure for emergency approval for suppliers? It's not good enough just to have an annual fire drill where you shut the line down for 5 minutes, troop everybody out and back in and restart the line. You should have a more robust test of your system. Next, please. And Section 8.5 is the preliminary steps to enable hazard analysis. This is a previously existing section, but it added the minimum relevant information to be considered when conducting the hazard analysis. Next. So what they've added is the characteristics of your raw materials to include the source, such as animal, mineral, or vegetable, and include the list of characteristics of raw materials, clarification given in regard to place of origin. And then also regarding the characteristic of the end product, it now includes the method and distribution, methods of distribution and delivery has been added. So that's something that you need to make sure your hazard analysis addresses when you're identifying your hazards. Preliminary steps, a little bit of a wording change with intended groups. It says they shall now be identified. The word before was considered. It also has added in preparing your flow diagrams that you include processing aids, packaging materials, and utilities such as air and water to be included in your flow diagrams, wherever those utilities may be an input. Descriptions of processes and process environment. They've added some things here, including statutory and regulatory authorities and customers as a part of your process environment. And external requirements. Next, please. Hazard identification and acceptable levels, internal epidemiological, scientific, and historical data shall also be used as an input in the identification of hazards, as well as statutory, regulatory, and customer requirements. So this means that you need to consider, the results of your own internal swabbing that you may do as a part of your environmental monitoring. Some clarification notes have been added, and there's a recommendation that you consider your hazards in sufficient detail. It's a minor point. In the hazard assessment, it's important to note this is a big change in wording. The word elimination of food safety hazard has been removed and replaced with the words prevention and reduction. And this is just an acknowledgement of the fact that elimination of food safety hazards is not really practical. You can prevent them or reduce them to acceptable levels. You must identify significant food safety hazards. And you must assess the feasibility of establishing measurable critical limits and applying timely corrections in the event of failure. The external requirements that can impact the choice and strictness of control measures shall be documented. So make sure you include that in your critical limits. Next, please. 8.5.2.2.2 has strengthened the identification of steps. When identifying hazards, the organization needs to consider these three things. Number B is an addition. It's all steps in the flow diagram. And then step C has included the word persons. Next, please. In validation, wording has been changed to clarify that validation applies to both single control measures and combination of control measures. So that's an addition. They previously didn't include combinations of control measures as validations for critical control points. And you are required to maintain the validation methodology and evidence of capability. So that very well may be a new aspect for you. Next. The word hazard control plan is now used for your HACCP plan and your operational prerequisite programs. They're now just calling it a single hazard control plan. CCPs need to be specified and measurable, and action criteria for OPRPs that is defined as measurable or observable specifications for the monitoring of an OPRP. Those must be defined. So that's some new language there that you need to comply with. Monitoring requirements now apply to CCPs and to OPRPs as well. For OPRPs, equivalent methods of verification of reliable measurements are now permitted instead of calibration. So that's an acknowledgement that not everything that you use to monitor an OPRP may be verified, that you can use a reliable measurement now instead of a calibration method. Sorry, I didn't state that well. Requirements for actions to be taken are not only applicable for when critical limits are not met, but also when action criteria is not met. So make sure that your documented procedures address action criteria for OPRPs. Next. Determination of critical limits and action criteria contain a key change to the standard. It clarifies the difference between CCPs and OPRPs, monitoring as a measurable limit and monitoring OPRPs as a measurable or observable action criteria. Again, those are key changes in your hazard control plan. Updating information, specifying the PRP and hazard control plan. There's been a change in wording, again, for hazard control plan. We've covered this on the previous slide. Next, please. Control of monitoring and measuring methods and equipment related to PRPs and hazard control plans must be adequate. That's now stated clearly. Frequency and calibration or verification shall be done at specified intervals prior to use. So you will need to define when and how your calibration and verification takes place. New requirement here at the bottom of this slide, validation of software. This is acknowledgement that we are in the 21st century and a lot of software is used in monitoring and measuring, and it must be validated. Next, please. Verification related to PRPs in the Hazard Control Plan, Section 8.8. Verification must include effectiveness of PRPs, impartiality of persons conducting the verification has been added, which means the same person, verification cannot be done by the same person that performs the monitoring. And when verification of activity shows nonconformity to an acceptable level of a food safety hazard, corrective actions are required. Next, please. PRP verification not only confirms that the PRP was implemented, but also that it's effective. So again, focus on outputs, verifying, simply conducting the verification as opposed to determining that it was effective and taking steps when it's not. Next, please. Corrections and corrective actions for control of product and process nonconformities. You are required to review and respond to the nonconformities identified by regulatory inspections, reports, and consumer complaints. So that's a new requirement. Make sure that you actually do that. You have a process in place to do that. We were evaluating the needs for actions to ensure that nonconformities do not recur has been replaced with, slight wording change here, determining and implementing actions to ensure. Next, please. Handling of unsafe products. Requirements have been clarified for evaluating each lot of product. So this is a clarification, really. There are requirements added for not releasing product affected by failure to meet critical limits. And please note that this doesn't mean you have to keep non-conforming product forever, but it does specify how it can be released from its hold in nonconformity for reprocessing, redirection, destruction as appropriate. Evaluation for release is allowed for products that fail to comply with an action criteria of an OPP. So that's a little bit different. There are provisions for releasing product from a hold due to failure to meet action criteria after evaluation. Next, please. You do need to retain records of that. Control of product and processes, more on this. 8.9.2.3 states that where action criteria shall be met, the following shall be carried out. These are just the things that you need to do when conducting an evaluation of product that does not meet an OPRP. Next, please. Control of products and process nonconformities. Requirements for product withdrawal now refer to withdrawal and recall. It's a slight wording change there. Expands the scope of that requirement. Section 9, performance and evaluation. We're into the check part of the cycle. Next, please. 9.1 refers to monitoring and measuring analysis and evaluation. It's a general requirement. It says you must determine what, when, and how you will monitor and measure. Who will analyze these results and be evaluated, and when it's done. Results must be retained and documented, retained as documented information. Changes to the internal audit requirements. Inputs for your internal audits, the required inputs for your internal audit have changed regarding the monitoring and measuring requirements. Requirements added to ensure that the result of the audit are reported to the food safety team and the relevant management. And a requirement has been added to determining if the food safety management meets the intent of the food safety policy and objectives. So that's a new thing, not just auditing various parts, but in determining that it meets the intent. Next, please. They've defined the inputs and outputs for management review. They've grouped a number of them under a general input heading of the information on the performance and effectiveness of the food safety management system. And the outputs have also been amended to include specific actions and decisions related to continual improvement opportunities and the need for updates and changes in the food safety management system. So read those carefully and make sure that management review inputs and outputs are as required. And as noted in previous slides, there are some things that we've talked about previously that are inputs to your management review. Next section, please. Your management review really needs to be about looking for trends, such as functions as customer satisfactions, internal, external audits, internal, external corrective actions, not just a list. Look for trends in the results. Did those actions address risks and opportunities? Achieve intended results? These are questions you should be asking and things that our auditors will be looking at. Next, please. All right, we are on the home stretch, Section 10, Improvement, the final part of the cycle, the ACT cycle. 10.1, nonconformities and corrective actions. There's a new clause specifying requirements to deal with nonconformities within the organization, including the requirement to determine if similar nonconformities could potentially occur. So you need to look at the things you find and see if they are pointing to problems elsewhere in your food safety management system. So particularly with customer complaints, you need to look at root causes. Next, please. So our auditor is going to look to, does the action relate to the root cause? Now let's be clear, corrections are those actions taken to immediately correct an identified problem. But corrective actions are on the root cause of the problem. So after you conduct your root cause analysis, you need to take a corrective action on why it actually occurred. And then you need to make sure that your action, your corrective action, is effective in preventing the recurrence of the problem. So effectiveness, again, more emphasis on outputs. Next, please. Continual improvement. This requirement has been extended to include improvement of the suitability and adequacy of the food safety management system, not just the effectiveness. So is your system suitable? Does it cover everything it needs to? Is it adequate? And here's some questions that your auditor is going to ask. What opportunities for improvement are you working on? Should these come from the management review inputs and outputs, so forth. Next, please. All right, this is our last slide. After this, I'm going to turn the controls over to Kim Onette, our training department provider, and to talk about some training that they have available. So the last slide here, it's just a slight wording change according to the new terms and titles. The auditor is going to ask, did the continual improvements achieve the intended results? And if so, how did site management update the food safety management system? Or if not, have you adjusted your planning? And with that, that's a rundown of the changes. I'm sorry we couldn't go into much more detail on that. And I apologize again for the technical problems that cut our time a little bit short. With that, I'm going to turn it over to Kim Kim Onette from our training department to talk about some offerings that they have. Kim?
Hi there, everyone. I'm not sure everyone can hear me. I just need to be taken off mute if that's possible, or just let me know you can hear me.
We can hear you.
Thank you. Thank you very much. Okay, so thank you, everyone. Mike, that was a great overview presentation of the changes. And there are changes that have come to the training organizations this year, too, with the conversion from 4.1 to version 5 for FSSC. So as Mike said, my name is Kim Onette. I'm the Technical Manager for Training and Education for the U.S. with NSF. If you, where you're looking at your screen, you see the Training and Education tab. That will take you to our website, NSF Learn. So if someone could just pop that slide forward, that would be great. Just advance me. Great. So there's our landing page for our training courses. Once you get there, if you're looking for training in ISO 22000 or FSSC version 5, what you would see below that initial line of orange buttons that say HACCP, GFSI Food Safety and Quality Benchmark Standards, you would just click on that button and all the GFSI standards come up. And so you would find ISO 22000 and GFSI there. We will have offerings in FSSC, all for the courses they're looking for, which would be lead auditor, implementation, foundation, and then we would also have 22,000 offerings of ISO 22000 foundation, lead auditor, transition from 2005 to 2018. There will be a delay in that availability of training. So we expect to start offering courses in September. FSSC has put a very rigorous process in place for their training organization. So all trainers will need to requalify, and there are some specific requirements that they need, which make good sense to ensure solid quality of training. I myself just finished last week with my ISO 22000-2018 lead auditor. So we will be moving the other trainers through that process so that we can offer support to you guys for your implementation from both a 22000 and an FSSC perspective, which you can find us on the website that was just up. All right.
Okay. With that, Jeff, do you have questions that you can put up, or how would you like to handle this? Well, I do not see any questions in the chat bar. So with that, I'm going to thank everyone for attending. We will be putting this presentation up, the recorded version, on the website. Again, I apologize for the technical difficulties. Please, if you have any questions, you can send them to me. Mike Govro, it's M-G-O-V as in Victor, R-O @nsf.org, and we'll do our best to get those questions to someone who can answer them, or I'll answer them myself. So with that, I guess we will sign off, and thank you all for attending. Look forward to working with you in the future, and thank you for partnering with NSF.